In 3 weeks, the United States will hold legislative elections that might shift the balance of power in Congress. What would that mean for the Trump presidency? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Election day in the U.S. is November 6th, but in many states around the country, people are already voting with early ballots. Up for grabs, all seats in the House of Representatives and a third of the Senate. And polls indicate that Republicans, the party of President Trump, will most likely lose control of the House, but keep the majority in the Senate. To discuss the implications of the election, we welcome Eleanor Clift. She is a political analyst for the Daily Beast. Also with us, Muchnick. He is a Republican strategist and president of the M2 Group, a public and government affairs firm. From New York, Amy Holmes is a political commentator and co-host of the public television show In Principle. And also here in the studio is CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Nathan, let's start in the studio.
Hi.
3 weeks out, what does it look for the two parties?
Well, it's really interesting. You know, we haven't seen this many, let's look at the House first, this many competitive races for a very long time. In fact, since about the 2010 election, when then President Barack Obama got a shellacking, in his own words, where he lost control of the House. There's 435 seats in the House, about 60 to 70 are considered competitive, and the Democrats only need about 23, 24, there are some independents, some are open, to take control. And that is definitely possible. And if we're looking at the generic ballot, the Democrats do lead quite heavily. But then we have a completely separate race in the Senate where only a third, as you know, every cycle is up for re-election. But Democrats are defending themselves in many states that voted for US President Trump. So they could even lose some ground, although that is not likely. But the pickups are much harder, but they only have to pick up essentially two to control the Senate.
Right. Nathan, let me ask you this. You say there's a high number of competitive seats in this election. The polls are pointing to the Democrats winning the House and the Republicans perhaps holding the Senate. Despite the fact that it's so competitive, is it still an open race?
Yeah, I think it is. You know, there's been a lot of talk of the blue wave, but then a lot's happened, and a lot could still happen in 3 weeks. Remember, this is Trump's America, where the news cycle is on fast forward the whole time. Republicans are very energized because of the Supreme Court. Trump is out on the campaign trail. Is that a good idea? Is it going to be a referendum on him or not? He is showing he's moving the needle on states and areas they need to win, not necessarily in Democratic areas, but it is still up for grabs. And it's very interesting to see how Democrats don't really have a message to counter Trump because Trump sucks up so much of the news cycle. Is this going to be a national race or is it going to be local? All politics are meant to be local, but Trump kind of turns that on its head a lot of the time.
What do you think, Eleanor? Where's this going?
I agree. I think the conventional wisdom right now is that the Democrats will pick up the House and the Republicans are likely to hold the Senate. It's like two different Americas because the House will turn largely on suburban districts and on the energy by an extraordinary number of women who are running and an issue set that includes protecting the Affordable Care Act, which was a signature plan under President Obama. There's some gun issues, gun control issues. We had a serious shooting in Parkland, Florida in February, and that's now part of the issue mix for suburban women who are saying this is not a Second Amendment issue about guns. We're worried about the safety of our children in school. And then in the Senate, because of a quirk in the calendar, you have mostly red states that Democrats are defending him in, states that President Trump won by 20, 30, and in points in West Virginia by 42 points. And yet the Democrats are running competitive in these states. And so the talk is, will it be a blue wave of modest proportions that takes the House, or will it be of typhoid proportions that can also take the Senate?
Yeah, those states that you were talking about that President Trump won in 2016, there is some evidence, isn't there, that there's a bit of buyer's remorse on the part of those people that voted for President Trump because the polls are pointing to the fact that they would probably vote Democrat now.
Well, I think his base, which is probably 35 to 40% of the country in these specific places, I think they're still pretty steady. But there were people who voted for him thinking, oh, time for a change, and really have gotten disillusioned. And Republicans have lost ground among independents, and I think that's very critical. But in these closing weeks, the president is out there doing 3, 4, 5 rallies a week, and normally a president who is popularity is well under 50% would stay off the campaign trail, but he knows he has to bring out his base in these particular states and to really rev them up. And so it's become, it's a base mobilization contest. Which side can get out their voters?
All right, let me bring in Amy Holmes from New York. And Amy, the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, called these elections the most important in his lifetime. He says American democracy depends on it. That could be hyperbole, but how important are these elections?
Could be hyperbole. I would think that actually his election in 2008 was one of the most historical and transformative elections for Americans, electing our first black president. Coming to the midterms, listen, historically, the president in power loses seats with his party in the Congress. So I don't think that that will necessarily come as a surprise to political prognosticators. The question is how narrow that difference will be. You know, we're hearing a lot of these red states on the Senate side that the Democrats are defending. Well, what we've been seeing in the last week and a half after the Kavanaugh effect is that Republicans are opening their leads. Marsha Blackburn was very narrowly neck to neck with Phil Bredesen in Tennessee. That lead has opened. We're looking at North Dakota. Heidi Heitkamp, the Democrat there, she just keeps falling further and further behind. So I think there are a lot of big question marks. What will be the Kavanaugh effect? And on the other side, in the Democrats' favor, will the good economy actually help them because Republicans will be complacent, that they think, wow, things are really going great. I don't need to go to the polls this midterm. I think it's a nail biter, and in Trump's world, I do not make predictions.
Morgan, what do you make of that? Because, I mean, are the Republicans, do you think, closing the gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question that the Republicans are closing the gap. And the comparison I like to make a lot is to sports. And I've made this comparison before, is that the Democrats were like a football team, like the Super Bowl a year ago. They had a huge lead. And all they had to do was just defend the lead, and they would be fine. They found a way to lose it, the Patriots did in the last Super Bowl. I equate that to the Democrats. Democrats had everything going for them. And I strongly believe that a lack of a clear policy message, just anger to President Trump, not be enough. Moreover, I strongly believe they've managed, from a political point of view, forget whether you believe it was good or bad or right or wrong, from a political point of view, I strongly believe that they have gone off the deep end on some of the rhetoric, some of the way they handled the Supreme Court issue with these sort of mob scenes everywhere, driving people out of restaurants and posting phone numbers of staffers on the website, threatening them with physical violence. The Republicans, there's a strong chasm between some Republicans who are pro-Trump and some that are never Trumpers. I really think that the ridiculousness of the mainstream media with the anger and the resentment has brought a lot of the Republicans back together. They wouldn't have otherwise have been, which will help them in, which is always a difficult midterm process for the party in power. I think Democrats had everything. And now, for the first time, I said this before, I now think there's a chance, a reasonable chance, that the Republicans will hold the House. As of a month ago, I never would have said that. No way.
That would defy history.
It would absolutely. It would defy everything.
As Amy pointed out, the party of the sitting president normally loses in the midterm elections. That's happened in 18 of the last 21 midterms.
And with this type of president, it's a non-traditional president that's been the most disruptive force in American politics, I don't know, more than 100 years probably, for better or for worse. So he should be beaten badly, and I don't think it's going to happen.
Nathan?
Well, to be fair, if I could jump in there to add...
I'll get you in a moment, Jamie. Go ahead.
To be fair, those are Republican talking points going into election. They want to rally the base and say, hey, we can win this, folks. You know, sports teams do it all the time, even if they're 10 points behind. He should be winning the House, to be perfectly honest with you. The economy's at 4.1%. It's an incredibly, the US is the engine of the world at the moment. It's doing exceptionally well. Republicans have had wins, 2 wins at the Supreme Court in the last couple of months. They passed a huge tax cut. No one's talking about the tax cut. It's quite incredible. People don't feel they have money in their pockets in the suburbs of Philadelphia and Los Angeles and Detroit, where this election will be decided. So the fact that he could lose the House with an economy that's growing at 4.1%, a massive tax cut, 2 Supreme Court justices, just shows how divided this nation is.
Okay, Amy, go ahead.
Oh, so I was going to jump in, which is, interestingly, before the, Kavanaugh fiasco circus debacle that the country was dragged through, Democrats had a double-digit lead in the generic ballot, which is when voters are asked, right now, today, do you prefer the Democratic Party to the Republican? After all of that, that has shrunk to a single digit. Nate Silver at 538.com, he has shown that, in fact, that actually might be even overstating the Democrat generic poll advantage, because if you look at it district by district, they're getting a lot more competitive. The super blue districts, of course, double digits, but those purple ones, it might be narrowing.
Eleanor, Amy brings up a good point there, but is this a district by district election, or is it about Donald Trump? Is this a national election?
I think it's a referendum on Donald Trump. Yes, he is the most motivating factor in all of these races. But Democrats in district by district are not talking about him, and Democrats running statewide are not talking about him. They are talking about health care, the fact that premiums are going up, the fact that the Trump administration is apparently going to do away with the requirement that insurance companies will have to cover you if you have a pre-existing condition. There are real-life issues out there that are motivating people. And the tax cut is a real dud, because nope, there isn't a single Republican ad even on the issue. They have run away from it so fast, and the deficit numbers are going up. And Republicans are very good at blaming Democrats for everything. And we'll see when the voters have their say, who's correct in their analysis of this election. But it does seem to me that it is largely a referendum on the president.
Do you agree?
I do. I would agree. I mean, but that's been the case. I mean, you've been doing this for far longer than I have, and you've been covering an incredible amount of races. The midterms are always, from my understanding, always a referendum on the sitting president.
Generally, a president who's unpopular, and this president is unpopular, he's in the low 40s, stays away from the campaign trail. So this is rather a different experiment, with the president out there saying, yes, it's all about me. You have to vote for me, or the Democrats are going to do all these terrible things. And then he generally spouts half a dozen lies about what Democrats are saying and doing.
So but if he does pull out a miracle and gets a better race, well then, I don't mean you personally, but you, meaning the sort of the analytical media, will then say, well then the country still loves President Trump. It's referendum on him, he wins, and now he's a great hero.
I mean, I think we could all say, quite honestly, that the country is divided, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you look at every state, every purple area, they can swing with an election. Right. Both the Democrats and the Republicans in this country have essentially turned out their bases, and it's basically 40-40 with 20 in the middle, and races are decided on turnout. What, for me, I'm going to be looking for, there has been a dramatic upsurge in voter registration for the midterms. Midterms turnout is usually awful. I mean, 20%, some places 30%, 40%, some places. Young people traditionally don't vote. We have seen a massive upsurge of young people registering, not just when Taylor Swift announced, but got people to sign up, but others as well. Yeah. That's going to be very interesting to watch, because they don't normally turn out. They didn't turn out, for example, in the general election, even though Bernie Sanders energized them. So that's going to be very interesting.
In 2014, which would have been the last midterm election, only 1 in 5 millennials voted. And the predictions now are 1 in 3. If the Democrats can get out this base of people who generally don't vote in this midterms, then they're going to do very well. But Hispanic voters aren't energized. And,
and they're unpollable.
Let me get to Amy.
College-educated suburban women who are motivated.
Yes, you're right.